PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. A lawsuit challenging Arizona's funding for school facilities began today. It's a landmark suit in that it could change the way the state funds school buildings and other capital needs. The suit was brought by school districts and education groups 7 years ago and alleges that lawmakers have not followed a court ruling from the 1990s that requires the state to adequately and equally fund school facilities. The trial is expected to last until late June. Closing arguments today in the criminal fraud trial of Donald Trump, prosecutors told the jury that the case was about a, quote, conspiracy and a cover-up involving Trump falsifying business records to try to keep a 2006 sexual encounter with the porn star secret prior to the 2016 election. Now, Trump's attorney called for a, quote, very quick and easy verdict in his closing statement, a statement that focused on former Trump fixer Michael Cohen, who testified to making the hush money payment at Trump's direction. Trump's attorney at one point today called Cohen, quote, the greatest liar of all time. Jurors could begin deliberations by tomorrow. We will have much more on today's closing statements in a moment. A federal judge today denied a special counsel request for a gag order on Donald Trump involving Trump's classified documents case. Judge Eileen Cannon, a Trump appointee, criticized prosecutors for failing to confer with Trump's attorneys in a meaningful way, calling the gag order request, quote, wholly lacking in substance and professional courtesy. Prosecutors want to limit Trump's ability to comment on law enforcement's search of his resort. Trump is accused of taking classified files from the White House and resisting the government's attempts to retrieve them. And severe weather continues to hit areas of Texas and Louisiana. This is what it looked like today in Houston as another round of powerful storms rolled through the area. More than 1 million customers in Texas are without power. Hurricane-force winds hit the Dallas area yesterday. The same damaging storms moved into Houston today with gusts of 75 miles per hour. Almost 24 people, including 4 children, were killed by severe weather across 5 states over the weekend in the central U.S. As we mentioned, closing arguments were presented today in the criminal fraud trial against Donald Trump. For analysis of the closing statements, we welcome former U.S. Attorney Paul Charlton, a partner at Dentons. Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us. Your thoughts on what we didn't actually hear these, but we got reports on what was going on there in the courtroom.
Very detailed reports. Let me start with the defense, because in New York, a little bit different than most other jurisdictions, the defense goes first, and then the prosecution follows up. Typically, you'll see the prosecution go first, defense goes second, prosecution does rebuttal. So the defense went first. Nothing surprising. If you've been in a number of criminal trials, you will have seen and heard very much of the same, especially when it deals with a key witness who's a convicted perjurer, as Michael Cohen is. Todd Blanche spent a great deal of time focusing on Mr. Cohen's prior lies. He tried to convince the jury that Mr. Cohen had lied in front of them and under oath. He also took a very interesting step, I think, and one for which he was severely castigated. He said that you should not convict Mr. Trump and send him to prison. That is impermissible. The jury's job is not to consider prison. It's not to consider incarceration in the event of a conviction, and he was roundly criticized by the judge for that, and the judge even issued a curing instruction telling the jurors not to pay attention to what, if any, sentence might be imposed in the event of a conviction.
I want to ask about that in relationship to juries and judges, because I've heard over the course of this trial the contempt that Trump can barely hold his contempt just by his look at the judge and what he says. And juries tend to trust and like judges, don't they?
They're like a juror's favorite aunt or a favorite uncle. And when they see a lawyer acting in a way that's disrespectful towards the judge, or even worse, the criminal defendant acting in a way that's disrespectful, it's as if you were being rude to a beloved family member. So it is poor tactics. But Mr. Blanche, I suspect, in making this argument and raising the possibility of a prior conviction, was arguing to an audience of 2. The first being he wanted one, just one. This is his goal, just to get one juror to hang, to not vote for a conviction. If everybody else votes for a conviction and only one juror says, no, I won't, that means there's a mistrial and a possible new trial, but that's going to take place well after this election goes on. The second audience is former President Trump. He was clearly making an argument that he wanted former President Trump to hear, because Todd Blanche is an experienced federal prosecutor. He knows it is impermissible to talk about the possibility of incarceration after conviction. The judge told him as much. So he was taking a risk as it relates to his own profession and his own reputation so as to make a client happy.
All right, that's the defense. I want to get back to maybe a little bit more of that. But as far as the prosecution is concerned, I thought it was interesting. They listed a number of people loyal to Donald Trump who came on and testified in a way that does not look good for Donald Trump.
So again, much of what you saw from the prosecution is something you might see in any number of other criminal trials in the United States, with the exception that this is a trial of a former president of the United States. The prosecution said, yes, essentially, we have an individual who has often lied, and he is an important witness. But the prosecution emphasized, we have other witnesses who have corroborated what Mr. Cohen, this convicted perjurer, said. And we have documentary evidence, even, the prosecution said, a smoking gun, a document that shows exactly what the payments were to be and why it is the payments were to be made. So the prosecution took what is, if you will, a paradigm, a model that prosecutors use when they have a difficult witness, one who has committed other crimes, and employed it here.
But how does the argument work? Yeah, he lies. He's a liar, but he didn't lie about this. I mean, obviously the others corroborated, but did the defense have something to catch on to there, or is that pretty weak sauce?
Well, again, what Todd Blanche, what the defense team for former President Trump are hoping for is that they will find one juror who will buy this idea that we cannot trust Michael Cohen at all. And the prosecution, in addition to saying we have a wealth of corroborating evidence to support what Michael Cohen told you today, despite his prior lies, they also said this is a lawyer who was hired by former President Trump. They said, and I love this line, we didn't go to the witness store and purchase Michael Cohen. This witness was chosen for us by former President Trump.
And they also basically said, yeah, he lies, but most of his lies were to protect Donald Trump.
Precisely. And so the jurors need to sift through that and decide whether or not Mr. Blanche, the Trump lawyer, is correct about not being able to trust the whole of the case because of Mr. Cohen, or to say, no, we can take all of the evidence as a whole and find enough evidence to convict former President Trump.
The National Enquirer publisher, his testimony the prosecution called absolutely devastating. Was it?
Mr. Pecker was a very good witness by all accounts. He is, the National Enquirer was at the time, and who was clearly allied with former President Trump, had this tool that I know you as a journalist would never have approved, and that is this catch and kill practice where you catch a story and don't publish it in exchange for some kind of payment. That is anathema to good journalism, and I think the prosecution used that witness, who came across very calmly, came across very reasonable, kind of, if we're going to use family analogy still, like a grandfatherly figure, and used it to support everything that Mr. Cohen had said.
Yeah, and also promoted positive stories for Trump and promoted negative stories for the opponents. And I had forgotten all about this. This idea that Ted Cruz's father was somehow involved in the JFK assassination, that came out of that whole National Enquirer, let's go after Trump's enemies.
Precisely, and that's part of what the narrative is that the prosecution has woven here very carefully, and that is that this was not just a single incident involving Stormy Daniels, the porn star, but a number of other individuals were involved in attempting to help former President Trump win the election.
The prosecution, as we're recording this right now, late this afternoon, they're still going at it. It's been hours and hours. Is that a wise thing?
North of 5 hours. You need to remember, I think, and prosecutors should be reminded of this before they stand up in front of jurors, that we now live in a TikTok age, an Instagram age, in which people take their news in 30-second and 1-minute bites at the most. And so to stand in front of a jury for 5 hours is extraordinarily taxing for these citizens. Imagine going back to school and sitting for a class that would go all day. You'd have to hear 4 hours. It was north of 4 hours for the defense, and now 5+ hours for the prosecution. That is a long day for anyone to take in a great deal of information, and it would have been, I think, a little better to have brought that time in so it was shorter.
Yeah, and the defense did make their presentation relatively short. I guess anything is relatively short to 5+ hours.
Yes.
Last question, and we're running out of time here, but I'm really curious about this. When the jury goes out, the longer they stay out means what?
So there's lore. It's anecdotal, not based on any science, but what most prosecutors will tell you is that the longer a jury stays out, the less the likelihood of a conviction, because somewhere in there is that one juror that Todd Blanche has been arguing for, holding out. The quicker the jury comes back, the more likelihood there is, say prosecutors, of a unanimous verdict for conviction.
Isn't it interesting that the possibility of a unanimous verdict for acquittal isn't even talked about here?
Other than former President Trump's lawyer, who said this should be a very easy acquittal. I don't think that that's in the universe of possibilities he can hope for and may even achieve a hung jury here.
Interesting stuff. Paul Charlton, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
These are the best home cooks in the country.
This is a really delicious plate of food.
That smells good.
We want something that's going to be beautiful. Good luck.
I'm a Southern boy, so I like to fry it or grill it or smoke it.
Food is my love language. If I'm not cooking for you, I don't love you.
This dish just makes me happy.
That salmon fire. I'm coming, Tim.
Tiffany's en route.
A special celebration of American folk music.
Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me.
I know you by a friendly face. There's a meeting here tonight. There's a meeting here tonight. Great God.
Saturday night at 6:30 on Arizona PBS.
Bird flu was recently detected in dairy and beef cows in 9 states. No reports as yet of Arizona cattle infections, but there is some concern over the U.S. dairy and beef supply. And joining us now is former State Health Director Will Humble, Executive Director of the Arizona Public Health Association. Will, thank you so much for joining. First, let's start with basics here. This H5N1 bird flu. What are we talking about?
So this is a new not brand new, but this is a new configuration of the influenza virus that showed up on the scene in about year 2020. It's really lethal in birds, wild birds, and especially if it get into domestic flock. It's a really lethal virus for the birds. So it's been around for a while. It's not brand new, but the new thing is that there have been some infections among dairy cattle and other cattle in the U.S. now.
How does it spread from bird to animal?
So USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture isn't saying exactly how it's happening, but what makes the most sense to me is that you've got farmers who use chicken feces and spread it out into the pasture. It's good fertilizer. But the virus is full, if the birds are infected, the virus is in those feces and then it's in the pasture and the cows can get it that way. That's my theory. The USDA isn't saying how it happened yet.
But in this cat, not as lethal as the birds.
Oh, in the cattle, they just, like their milk production goes down.
Yes.
They eat less, but it's not a lethal infection in the cows.
Well, let's go to extremes here. What about from bird to cattle to human, or bird to human? As humans, are we at risk here?
Probably not. Now, we remember the H1N1 pandemic back of 2009? Most influenza pandemics start in birds, because that's where the recombination happens. They infect pigs. Pigs have similar respiratory receptors than humans. It mutates in the pigs, and then humans get it after it's changed in the pig.
Interesting.
So cattle are a different animal than a pig. We're closer to pigs than we are cattle.
And yet, I've heard in these 9 states, there was one farm worker who tested positive. Is that just an outlier? Is that just a...
Yeah, well, there's 2 now, as of today.
There's 2?
So, yeah.
Okay.
But it was an eye infection. So the milk splashed into the I guess, rancher's eye and got an infection, but not a bad, it wasn't lethal.
What about testing? Is CDC testing on this? And are people going along? Are they cooperating with this testing?
So it's really USDA's job, U.S. Department of Agriculture, more than it is CDC. So they're spending a lot of time and effort testing the milk and the meat of the cattle. CDC is doing a little bit of work when it comes to the workers in the farms. But they're testing the meat and they're testing the milk.
What are they finding?
The milk's, if it's an infected cow, the milk's full of the virus.
Wow.
But almost all the milk that we drink is pasteurized, and that kills the virus. That's why we did pasteurization in the very beginning. That's why I'm wearing my tuberculosis tie. That's why we.
That's right. That's
why we started pasteurizing.
But isn't there a movement, some sort of groundswell to don't pasteurize this and do?
It's a very boutique thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you have to know where to buy your raw milk, and it's probably from the farmer or in a rural area. You'd be hard-pressed, I think, to go to 10 stores and find it anywhere.
How much research needs to be done, though, to figure out the transmission process of this and perhaps other viruses?
Good question. USDA, I think right now is focused on making sure that the meat supply and the milk supply is safe. I think figuring out how this happened is going to take longer. Their immediate concern is to make sure that the meat and the dairy supplies in the states that have the infections are okay.
And I would imagine also to protect things like turkeys, because wasn't there a huge hit to turkeys here a couple years ago?
Well, it's been killing flocks of birds for the last few years. And it's super contagious. So one bird gets an infection in these contained areas. I mean, the whole flock is basically, they have to destroy the flock. Yeah, so it's really expensive for farmers of birds.
So bottom line, U.S. dairy and beef supply, how safe is it?
Safe.
Safer? It's getting safer all the time, or what?
Well, raw milk isn't that safe if you're
Right.
in one of those states that has, but I wouldn't recommend raw milk anyway. But no, USDA sample, right before the show, USDA put information up on their website that all of the meat, 95% of the meat samples that they sent into the lab 99% of the meat samples they sent into the lab were negative.
And again,
for hamburger and beef. Yeah.
It's National Hamburger Day, by the way. Did you know that?
I did know that, sadly.
Yeah, okay. But if it's in the milk, if it's in the meat, let's say you happen to get, you lucked out and you got that small percentage, does it matter to humans?
Oh, so USDA did a study on that just last week, and they injected H5N1 virus into the meat, into the hamburger, and then cooked it, and then found out what happened. So if it was well done, no virus. Medium, no virus. The 120-degree meat, you could find particles, but the virus was dead.
Okay, so even medium rare is okay on National Hamburger Day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last question here. Did you realize that the FDA okayed today a feed ingredient that would cut methane emissions in cows?
That's a good intervention. The cows put off a lot of methane, which is a carbon capture, or, not carbon, it's climate change gas.
Yes.
Say that exactly.
Yeah, it contributes to global warming.
Right. So if you can find simple interventions like that, you can make a big difference. I don't know anything about this situation, but it makes a lot of sense to me that they would do that.
Yeah, because and methane, again, as you mentioned, is much more powerful in that sense, but it doesn't last quite as long.
Right. It's a much more powerful greenhouse gas, but it lasts in the atmosphere only about 10 years, whereas CO2 lasts a long, long time.
All right. So on National Hamburger Day, we can relax as far as the meat and dairy supply. Will Humble, thank you.
All right, take care.
Language barriers can often lead to misinformation in immigrant communities. This is a special concern in an election year as some with a different first language move away from mainstream media in favor of alternative news sources. For more on this, we're joined by Dr. Young-Un Moon, researcher at the Midas Lab at ASU's Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Welcome to Arizona Horizon.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. How serious of an issue is misinformation in general in immigrant communities?
Yes, so let me kick things start off here. I mean, an immigration population, more broadly speaking, communities of color have a very different experience with American news media. So I would say they are living in a two separate different information world within the same country. So what I mean is that these communities are more vulnerable to misinformation and disinformation. And for example, a Spanish language content often goes a less rigorous fact checking on Facebook. Which means that a misinformation spreads very easily among these communities. And think about it's a huge impact on this population. It's because it impacts their ability to make an informed decision about their lives and communities, including some of their democratic processes like an election.
Yeah.
And think about this, as far as I know, the immigration population is currently is 46 million right now, and then it is projected to go into 65 million by 2065. So I think it is very crucial to like help them to assess like this significant like a share of our population can assess accurate and also relevant information.
Is it a question of language barriers, or is it just a mistrust, or they don't identify necessarily with mainstream media?
I think so. We recently conduct a research about like how Asian immigrants specifically like feels about American news media, and like there is like it's not something about language barrier, but like I think there is like deeper issue. So there is like some psychological disconnect, I would say, between the American news media and this immigrant people. So they think that like they are not often represented or some like understood by mainstream media, which drives them towards alternative news sources.
Drives them to become, I think you call them homeland news junkies. They basically go back to their homeland news sources, and that might be good for some things, but maybe not so good for others?
Oh yes, so like they are like just like prefer to stay connected with their homeland issues, like what's happening in their home countries.
Right.
And like they used to think the American issues in relation to their home country. So like we call them homeland news junkies. And I mean like it is good that they get, the alternative news sources can like give them like some sense of belonging, some familiarity, and like some comfort. But also like it comes with always the risk, because like it means that it leads to these people more exposure to some unvetted or word of mouth information than some well-researched content.
Indeed, and that is especially important in an election year. I mean, you got to get that information. It's got to be accurate information.
Yeah. So I think like there is like because like there are not many trustworthy news sources for them. So that's why like specifically cater their needs to their needs, and even available like ethnic media sources like usually the ethnic media news don't have like enough like resources or some capacities to like thoroughly cover American society and politics in detail. So I think like this creates like some fertile ground to like misinformation and disinformation spread, and this is a really the important issue there.
So what would be the best course of action, do you think? Mainstream media trying to connect better with these folks, or ethnic media doing a better job of vetting and not succumbing to misinformation and disinformation? I
think like it is true that like ethnic media has like a better like a trusted relationship with these communities, but at the same time, I think because like as I said, like they have like some lack of resources and also like some capacities for like a fact checking. So I think like that is like some dilemma of this situation. So like let me give you some examples. Like for example, last like a 2020 election, like a disinformation campaign targeted some Hispanic and also African American communities like were very significant, and like often like propagated like some nano influencers, I would say. So nano influencers refers to some accounts that has like a 1 to 10,000 followers, but like still they can yield some considerable influence in their own digital circles. And if we have like if there are some 100 or 1,000 nano influencers, like that will be a huge issue. And also like some interesting like cases that like I encountered during my research is that so like there was some YouTuber that who usually like covers some like a culture content, like something K-pop or some like BTS, and also they suddenly discussing something conspiracy theory or like a Pizzagate. So I think like it's very striking that like how entertainment platforms can become a vehicle for spreading political disinformation.
Well, it's great research and it's fascinating stuff. Dr. Young-Un Moon, again, ASU Cronkite School. Good stuff. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that's it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.